This is Football at 4.
4 o'clock here on the Sports Bash. Time for Football at 4. It's brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary. It's powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. And, of course, you can get that on all podcasting platforms and their YouTube channel. Just search Inside the Birds. And Geoff Mosher is here for a Mosher Monday. We take a look at post-OTAs. They're getting ready for the next wave of OTAs. That'll start next week. And there's a lot of interesting guys here, Geoff, on the bubble, I guess you will, if you will, that we're going to be taking a look at. You guys did a podcast today where essentially you talked about that you can't keep everybody. There's a lot of interesting battles on this team. And one guy, Vic Fangio, brought up last week that I was intrigued by. I want to get your take on is the linebacker spot, Zach Baun. He mentioned that he can play inside. Is that a spot that, you know, we haven't been talking about him about, but does that make the linebacker position even more cloudy now?
I don't know if it makes it cloudy. Mike, it gives them optionality. I mean, anytime that you've got multiple bodies in one spot and you have to make decisions, you can say it makes it cloudy. But it's a good situation. And plus, you know, Zach Baun is a guy that they envision being able to play the inside, but they're not 100% sure. You know, Vic Fangio said, hey, we think we can do it. He's built like an outside linebacker. But if anything, it just sort of allows them to play with some numbers and gives them the optionality to say, hey, you know, we have this number of inside linebackers without Zach Baun. So if we add Zach Baun, then that's just another guy. Or same thing with outside linebackers. We can go maybe a little shorter on edge rushers if we don't think that there's a bottom roster guy who can make it. But, you know, we can count Zach Baun as one of them.
Yeah, well, one of the guys it's in the mix there is VanSumeren, and he's a guy that I think people are kind of counting out as well. Do you actually put him in the mix at that position?
Do I put Zach Baun in the mix at edge rusher?
No, VanSumeren. Do you put him in the mix?
VanSumeren.
Yeah, he's another guy I feel like people are kind of counting out at that position. He brings Zach Baun into the conversation. If he's doing that, should we put Ben's name into that conversation?
You know, it's interesting because, as I said on the podcast, Mike, with all the additions that they've made, it's like now it seems where's the path to him making Ben VanSumeren making the 53 because you've got Dean, because you've got White, those are your projected starters, right? Because Baun is they're going to look at him there. That would be a third. Oren Burks is a veteran they signed for a reason. That's a fourth. And they drafted Jeremiah Trotter Jr., you know, in the 5th round. Usually those guys at least get a year, right, to prove themselves unless they just have terrible camps. So it does make it harder for Ben, but there's something about the whole situation, Mike, between now and the start of the season when they really have to decide. I just have this weird feeling that Ben's going to figure out a way to make it because he's such a great athlete. I know he's been Andrew Checo wrote a really good story about him and how hard he's been working this offseason, how he impressed the Eagles in his limited time that he made it onto the field. He was a better diagnoser, at least, or more instinctive than they had anticipated or seen earlier, when they signed him. That was sort of the book on him. That wasn't his strength. He knew it. So that's why the competition has to play itself out. And every once in a while, Mike, they go really heavy at one spot because they can go lighter in others. It's not usually inside linebacker. And last year was D tackle where they kept 7. But when they really like a guy, they figure out a way to keep him. So we'll have to see what happens there with Ben.
All right, that linebacker room, interesting. I thought the Zach Baun thing was really the highlight of what Vic Fangio said. Did you have something else that he said? Not the highlight, obviously, but that was one name. He didn't even remember some of the other linebackers' names. He had to ask the PR guy, hey, who am I forgetting here? Oh, yeah, we've got this guy and that guy. But Baun was a guy that he specifically said. He mentioned Jalen Carter, hey, we want to get him more snaps this year, seemingly like where Jordan Davis is. Was there something from Vic Fangio to highlight that stood out to you?
Well, and I think this was discussed with Adam with you when he was on with you last week, or maybe Andrew. It's sort of interesting to me that when discussing Jalen Carter, the first thing he said was, as long as he stays in shape, he's going to be good. That was really not a question with Jalen Carter. That was more of a question, right, for Jordan Davis. Now, he did say that also about Jordan Davis, but I just didn't expect to hear that first about Carter. But, you know, we know that Carter's a guy who's going to have to be stayed on and coached. And when he's out on the field, he's tremendous. He's a great player. And we also know Vic is going to be a guy who's not afraid to call people out. He's not, I mean, you heard him say it. There's no magical scheme when we're struggling. We're going to have to simplify things. If you're looking for me to scheme you out of it, you know, that's not going to happen. So kind of appreciated his honesty, his candor. He does remind me, at least the way he speaks, with Jim Johnson a little bit, not his scheme or anything. But I think that if Jalen Carter's, you know, doing something he shouldn't do, Vic's going to come out and say it. I don't know if the last few guys would have done that.
Right, yeah. He certainly seemingly was a no-nonsense guy. Very short. It's going to be interesting to see him on days when he is scheduled to talk after a loss. And he's getting, I mean, yeah, he's been a head coach. He's been a coordinator. But, you know, he's going to look up and see 45 people asking him questions. And I'm not, you know, he was a little short with some of his stuff the other day, right? I mean, it's going to be an interesting dynamic to see how he handles this.
Yeah, I mean, he's been in a lot of different markets. So, you know, he's been in Chicago. That's a big market. He's been in San Francisco, fairly big market. I know, you know, Miami, he's got a lot of media. So that part, to me, isn't going to be shocking for him. He's been doing this for a while. What I think is interesting is if you go back to the Jim Johnson era, right, there were times Jim would say something that, you know, Andy did not sanction. You know, Andy would be like, Jim, maybe we don't need to tell the media that. But Jim was Jim. You know, no one's going to tell him what to do. He's kind of curmudgeonly in a great way for media because he's going to tell you what he's thinking. And I think this regime, especially upper management, Jeffrey Lurie, Howie Roseman, a lot of this not talking about injury stuff isn't just a Nick Sirianni thing. That comes from up top. They really have been a big proponent of not giving out too much information injury-wise to the media. And that starts up at top. So here's Vic Fangio, who's just honest and he's going to tell you how it is. Now, he may not tell you if a player is injured or not, but he's going to tell it like it is in a way that, again, the last few guys who are younger guys just haven't done.
All right, Geoff Mosher, Football at 4. Let's look at, we mentioned the two guys, Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, as key guys on this team. You would have Milton Williams. Who else is in there that will interest you as we get closer to this behind those three that I guess would be battling for the rotational snaps?
The Gabe Hall kid, the defensive tackle out of Baylor that was an undrafted free agent. He interests me because, as we've talked about on this show, Mike, you know, he's someone that the NFL scouts will tell you can play. He can play. He just needs to, you know, be motivated, got to be coached up and all like and that. So, and there's, you know, as we talked about on the show, depth in the interior defensive line is a little bit lesser than it's been in the past. No Fletcher Cox anymore, no Javon Hargrave. So those are some big names that they've lost over the last 2 years. Yes, they've added Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis. You hope that he takes a big step up. But from the depth pieces you're talking about now, especially with Milton Williams looking like a starter, you know, Moro Ajomo, who was a 7th-round pick last year, good motor. He's someone I think will get a good look in the nickel packages because he can rush the passer. But it strikes me that, again, they don't have a natural backup nose tackle, like a mammoth run-stuffing guy in the mold of a Jordan Davis, just to be a backup for that position if Jordan Davis either gets hurt or, you know, struggles.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I was wondering, you know, Marlin Tuipulotu is a guy who's been around here for a couple of years. Most, you think he has an expanded role this year? Would he be the guy that would factor into that spot?
So when they drafted him out of USC a couple of years ago in the 5th round, I was told that he was a guy who had positional versatility. He was good against the run. He had a little bit of juice as a pass rusher, but he could play. He'd be an undersized zero technique like Jordan Davis, but he's able to do that. He's able to fight off the double teams and give you. And 2 years ago, he was playing a decent number of snaps as a backup in that spot. You know, they had Linval Joseph when Davis sprained his ankle, and Tuipulotu would be getting in there. But if you were to look at his career in totality, you know, I think he was hurt his first year, played more his second year. Last year, I feel like he played more when Matt Patricia took over than Sean Desai. But at the end of the day, he's just been kind of a guy, a rotational guy who every once in a while your name maybe makes a play or two. But for the most part, it's not like you're thinking, yeah, we're great because we have Marlin Tuipulotu as a backup. He's going to be pushed here with some of the guys that we mentioned before. So if he's on the team.
All right, Moshe, I got a couple guys I want you to that I'm going to ask about snaps here. Who plays more snaps in your mind, Nolan Smith or Brandon Graham?
Oh, my gosh. The fact that you're even asking me that is – I mean, if it's not Nolan Smith, then the Eagles aren't going to be in for a very good year.
Well, I mean, there are two guys that are, kind of edge rushers. They like Graham in that lesser role, I guess, not a lesser role, but the role that he's in. I would imagine he's going to stay in a very similar role to that. Nolan Smith didn't even have that role last year. So you're saying he will surpass the role that Brandon Graham had last year?
I'm saying he's expected to, and that's what the coaches want from him, and that's why they took him late in the first round last year. And by year two, I'm sure they were imagining with some added strength and some technique work that they would be able to get, at very least, a high situational pass rusher out of him playing a decent number of snaps. So Brandon Graham's played his very few snaps last year. Now, maybe Vic wants to move him inside and nickel a little bit because you don't have Fletcher Cox anymore, so that might give him a little more snaps than he played last year. I don't know. I mean, this guy is, over 35 years old now. So I would just say that it's probably not a great sign for Nolan Smith if Brandon Graham is out snapping him at the stages of the career that they're both in. And then if that's the case, that wouldn't be a good sign probably for the Eagles.
That's a positive answer there. Then hopefully a bigger role for Nolan Smith. Who has more snaps, Isaiah Rodgers or Avonte Maddox?
Oh, man, this is like a trick question. I mean, both of them have to make the team first.
You think there's a shot that one of those guys – you think there's a shot that one of those guys doesn't make the team?
Oh, I think that there's a shot that both of them don't make the team.
Wow.
I mean, they're both going to be let's break it down here. First of all, Avonte Maddox was signed pretty late on a one-year deal, right? I mean, they had signed Tyler Hall, who's a pretty good nickel corner in his own right, to push him, right? So everyone knows Avonte Maddox can play, but his injury status made him sign on a one-year deal, not a lot of upfront money, but also Cooper DeJean can play nickel, right? C.J. Gardner-Johnson can play nickel. Isaiah Rodgers might be able to play the nickel. But Isaiah Rodgers in his own right is in a competition with like 5 other guys for 2 or 3 backup spots. So he hasn't played in a year. I can't just rubber stamp either of these guys definitely making the team.
Yeah, I mean, I guess because – and the reason I asked those two is because a lot of the other guys don't play nickel. Ringo, Ricks, Joe, those guys are not really nickels. You're looking at a guy who could play in the slot, and it's seemingly – now you're saying Cooper DeJean, would they look at him as the slot guy as opposed to a slot guy? No,
and let's not sleep on the Tyler Hall name. That was a really interesting signing. It's a guy who's got NFL experience. He was playing with the Raiders last year. He was their nickel at times last year. And I know that, we reported on ITB, the Raiders liked how he played. So that's just another guy who's in the fray here to try to compete. And, may the best and healthiest person win at camp. And I've always found that when guys miss an entire year, like Isaiah Rodgers did, you think you're in shape, but then you get out there and you realize, man, I haven't played in a year. So I do think he faces an uphill climb from that position. I'm not saying can't do it. I'm not saying it's going to be any harder on him than anyone else. I just think that he's a guy among a crowded house, and the Eagles, for the first time in a while, have 4 or 5 guys who have nickel capabilities, right? If you count Hall, Maddox, Rodgers, DeJean, and C.J. Gardner-Johnson.
Well, how much of this, because you got, all right, Slay, Mitchell, DeJean. You would think those 3 guys obviously are making the team. After that, I guess you could make a case for or against Ringo, Bradberry, Maddox, Rodgers, Ricks, McPherson, Goodrich, Jobe, Hall, and they brought in Sean Stevens today. So you got, 13 guys there. After the first 3, you can make a case for or against almost every single guy, and they can't keep them all.
Well, I got on Adam for this in the podcast, so I'll give you a little playful rib too. Can you really make a case for James Bradberry at this point?
Well, the only case I can make is his contract, I guess. Or,
right.
Or listen, you guys would know more, but was Bradberry unhappy? What, did he not like the system? Was he not a good fit? Did they like him better in this system? This is a guy that's a year removed, or 2 seasons removed from being one of the best players in this defense. Then last year, all of a sudden, he just took 2 steps back. So I guess the Eagles might want to say, let's take another look at him. Now, they'll know when he, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you draft Quinyon Mitchell in the first round, Mike. You're planning on getting him on the field as long as he's holding up his end of the bargain. And if he's not, and you're worried about him, and you have Cooper DeJean, you have some other guys who played outside corner, I just think Bradberry is, honestly, I think the Eagles are rooting for him to look great in training camp. So somebody forks over a 5th or a 6th right before the cut down date, and says, all right, we'll take Bradberry off your hands.
So the argument for
you're stuck with the contract.
Yeah, the argument for him is obviously what he gets paid. The obviously against would be, well, if Vic Fangio sees him and says, "Yep, this guy did lose a step. We're ready to move on, and we have the ammunition to move on." That would be the argument for and against. Now, the for could be, hey, this guy was a second-team All-Pro player, and oh, by the way, he looks like it when he gets out on the field. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, trust me in this. This decision will not be Vic Fangio's decision. He'll have input in it. It will be Howie Roseman's decision. To my knowledge, I'd have to go back and look. I do not believe the Eagles have made any moves this offseason that warranted the post-June 1st cut. They may have with one of Cox or Kelsey's contracts because of the weird structure of it. But I do believe they have the ability to have one more, if not both. So, and by the way, they're plenty relief under the cap. They don't even need to use the post-June one if they wanted to move on from James Bradberry. But this will be a Howie Roseman's decision, and he will work those phones coming out of camp. And if anyone's willing to do anything, he will. I imagine he would make the move, take the low conditional 6 that can become a 5 type deal. And then if it came down to waiving him just to have room for whether it's a Ben VanSumeren or somebody else who we're talking about, wouldn't surprise me. I mean, I think he's ready to turn.
Well, but that room there will probably have the most arguments, I would imagine.
The cornerback room?
Yeah, like you're talking about cut down day. You're at training camp. Slay, Mitchell, DeJean. All right, you guys are in. Everybody else, state your case. Ringo, Maddox, Rogers, Ricks, McPherson, Goodrich, Joe, Hall, Stevens. Go ahead, fight it out.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. It's a little bit like the linebacker, but even more so. Yeah,
right, exactly, because there's so many guys. Sidney Brown, what kind of?
I remember last year, Josh Jobe was the darling of camp and came out and was the first guy to play on the outside, and they tried to move Bradberry inside a little bit when they had injuries. And then by middle of the year, it was Eli Ricks, and by the end of the year, it was Keely Ringo. So you may see something one day in training camp and think something 2 weeks later, and then something else 2 weeks after that.
Exactly. What kind of role do you see for Sidney Brown?
He's got to get healthy. We'll see if he's able to start training camp on – oh, man, there's some big fire. Sorry, I'm on the highway, Mike, and it looks like there's a huge fire here on 42. But what was I saying? Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. I lost my train of thought. Ask it again.
Sidney Brown.
Can
he stop that fire truck? Can Sidney Brown do enough to stop that fire truck? By the way.
And maybe. I saw him in a power lift, some kind of competition, right, from the Eagles the other day.
I did see that.
Weights against someone.
Yeah, he was giving Jalen Hurts a run for his money.
Oh, I thought it was Kenny Gainwell.
No, it was Kenny Gainwell, but I'm saying, I mean, next on the list.
Oh, yeah, that's what you're saying. Yeah. No, but he'll have a role, Mike, as soon as he's healthy. But obviously, he had that injury late. We're gonna have to see how he is in training camp. I think if you remember a couple of years ago, Rodney McLeod was coming off the same thing, right? And he spent most of the first 2 weeks of camp on PUP, and then I think it was the last week of camp where he came off PUP. So Sidney's obviously younger, but still, it's not. I don't think the whole comeback regimen is all that different. So I would think by the middle of the year, but by October, you start to really maybe get him into the rotation more, and you can play some big nickel with him, C.J. Gardner-Johnson, and, Reed Blankenship, or maybe you're playing Cooper DeJean in certain sub-packages. So it just gives them more options.
All right, Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast, which you can get on all podcasting platforms. Just a little preview what could be happening on the defensive side of the ball. OTAs, I think, are Monday next week is the next set. They've got 2 days and a day off and a couple other days. So the Eagles will be back on the field a lot in the month of May here. They've got off-season workouts on the 20th. The 22nd, the 23rd, May 28th, May 30th, May 31st, and then their mandatory mini camps, June 4th and 6th. So we got another good couple weeks of Eagles doing some stuff here for Football at 4 on the Sports Bash Live. And don't forget the Inside the Birds podcast, which you can get on all podcasting platforms. Just search Inside the Birds for the YouTube channel as well. Geoff Mosher, everybody. Be careful out there, man.
All right, if anyone's going from your area to Philly on the Atlantic Expressway, 9B, it's actually 42 now, there's a car on fire.
Oh.
So be careful.
All right, overturned car. Put that on the Waze. Is it still there? Thumbs up, yes.
All right, see you, Mike.